Hello, I'm Neil Jeffers. I'm the author of the Dictionary of Pastellists before 1800, which appeared in print in 2006 and which I put online a couple of years later and have since expanded regularly. It's now about 3 or 4 times the size of the original volume. More recently, I've taken the parts of the dictionary that relate to Maurice de La Tour, the most important Pastellist of the 18th century, and expanded them into the form of a catalogue raisonné. But as a virtual catalogue, it's not printed on paper, although I took all the pages and printed them out in a single copy, which looks like this. But I recognise that virtual dictionaries require a little bit of explanation. There are unfamiliar systems involved in any attempt to put things online. I've resisted the temptation to develop a complicated database which you can interrogate using specific rules that you have to learn, and I've made my work appear as closely as possible to a printed book by using PDF documents, which effectively are the pages of a printed book. But they have the added advantage that you can search them, you can build hyperlinks into them, and do all sorts of things that you can't do with a printed book. And crucially, you can expand, amend, and correct them in a way that a printed book does not permit. So for that reason, I think this is the way forward. I think many catalogue raisonnés, except for the most popular artists, are going to have to be in this form. For those of you who have difficulty, I've made this film. It's, if you like, a Janet and John version, explanation of how to find material in the website. If you know who Janet and John are, you probably need this film. If you don't, that means you're younger than I am, and you may well be able to work your way around the website intuitively, because there's nothing particularly difficult or mysterious in any things I'm going to tell you today. Now, a catalogue raisonné is different from a book. There have been plenty of books about La Tour. The literature is actually vast, and many of you may have attended the exhibition in Versailles in 2004, which had this splendidly illustrated catalogue. But it handles about 50 pastels by La Tour, which is only a tiny part of the oeuvre. The last catalogue raisonné for La Tour was, however, in 1928. It's this volume, written by Georges Wildenstein, but with a preface by Albert Bénard, who was a practicing pastelist himself. So we call it Bénard and Wildenstein, although that's a little unfair to Wildenstein. It has about 1,000 entries, including copies and versions and so on and so forth. And it has a section of illustrations, which are frankly not of great quality. So we can certainly do better than that. We can do better than that, both in the quality of the reproduction that's available online and in the quality of the search and other facilities that I've described. So let's take a look at the website. So the first thing to do is to go to your web browser. I happen to use the BBC News website as my homepage, but whatever it is, you simply either Google my name or Pastellists, and you'll get yourself to the website. Remember that Pastellists is spelt with 2 L's, and my name is difficult enough, so I'm not going to spell it out for you. But even simpler than that is you simply type into the URL box www.pastellists.com and click on enter. And then that takes you to the home page of the dictionary website. It's actually called Pastels and Pastellists, but it is in effect the online dictionary of Pastellists, so either of those names will get you there. Now, the key features are laid out on this home page, but the vital tool is this string of tabs on the left which take you to various parts of the website. The most important of these is the list of artists. If you click on that, you're taken to an index of artists, and if you're looking, for example, for Perronneau, you just click on the PE, and that allows you to scroll down quickly to Perronneau. Because Perronneau is an important artist with a lot of works, his entry is actually divided into a number of different articles, and you can click on any of these. Most of the less well-known, less important Pastellists have single articles. Each of these hyperlinks is to a PDF document, and the PDF documents, which we'll come on to in a moment, each look like the pages of a book. They're up to 30 pages long. They can take a few seconds to download depending on your broadband speed. And when you click on a PDF, what happens is that, let's click on this, and you can see what happens is that there is a download that is occurring up there. In a moment we'll go and retrieve some of those downloads from the download page. But I want to go back and just show you some of the other tabs that are on the available from the home page. If you get stuck on anything about how the information is arranged, go to the abbreviations tab. That again downloads a PDF document which describes the system in the dictionary, the order of the entries, the order of material within the entries, and so on, in some tedious detail. There's an activity table that lists the top 200 Pastellists by different schools, dates of activity, where they were active, and so on. There's the important tab of the bibliography, because I refer to publications throughout the entries in abbreviated form of author and date, and you can decode those by looking them up in the bibliography. There are indexes of people like collectors and suppliers and so on. I won't take you through those. Here, for example, is the engravers list. This is just an alphabetical index of engravers and the works in pastel that they engraved. There is quite extensive material on a tab called genealogies. These take you to many pedigrees for important families, both royal and non-royal, and give you details of the pastels that have been made after each member of the family. There's a list of museums where current holdings are listed. There's even a panorama which shows you some of my favourite pastels organised by school and date. And you can click on these and bring up a larger image. The index of sitters I referred to. There's an index of subjects which deal with some of the pastels which are not formal portraits of individuals, but either mythological or historical or still life genre pictures of one kind or another. But as I say, the most important indexes are those of artists. And finally, I want to come to where the La Tour material is held. There's a kind of sub-homepage for La Tour. And this page provides a kind of introduction to the La Tour catalogue, as well as the hyperlinks to the various parts of that. Like Perronneau, the La Tour material is divided into 6 fascicles, but these are of much greater length than those for other artists in the dictionary. The entries include far more detail, short or medium-sized essays on each sitter, which we'll come to in a moment. In the case of La Tour, there are also about a dozen longer entries in the form of essays of up to 20 pages, which describe and discuss the individual works. And we'll see some of those in a moment too. The La Tour material also includes an introductory essay, which is effectively a biography of La Tour, discusses his work from various different angles, and links to all the other material on this page. There are documents also describing the critical fortune, comments on La Tour throughout the ages since his life. There's a short document describing the portraits of La Tour by other artists. There are also useful concordances both to the 1928 catalogue by Wildenstein and also to other documents such as the important collection in Saint-Quentin, which have different numbering. You can, of course, access the numbers by searching my website. You can do this for La Tour, you can do it for every other artist. Just go back to the home page and use the search box. You can search for anything. You can search for the name of a sitter, you can search for a museum, an inventory number, the date of a sale. Thus, for example, if you search for a date, and you have to use the form which is adopted throughout the dictionary of day, month and year, separated by full points, no spaces, and the month in Roman numerals. So, for example, the 10th of July 1872 is 10.V11.1872. Let's just search for that and see what comes up. Well, there are 4 entries here. One of them is referred to in the index of collectors, and that will give you more details about the sale and who sold at that stage. One of them is in one of the Perronneau articles, you can pursue that. One of them is in the La Tour articles, and we'll go to that in a moment. And there's another in a different essay. So what happens if I then click on this hyperlink is that we'll download a PDF, and that PDF will be the 3rd fascicle in the La Tour catalogue, which we'll look at now. So this is the PDF that comes up when I open it, and I'm going to search again for the same date. So this time I do Control F because it's PDF, and that's the usual way for searching any PDF. You just find the string 10.V11.1872. Of course, you probably put it on your palette, in which case you just do cut and paste. And you click on Next, and here we are. That takes you to the entry for a pastel of Pierre-Louis Ledeguive, who's actually La Tour's notary. So let's look at this. We can shrink the page and see the whole entry, or indeed we can view 2 pages at a time. And you see that the entry on Ledeguive actually begins on the previous page. There is an essay about the sitter, which discusses the main pastel, which you see here on the top right, as well as the préparation for it. And that gives you the opportunity to explore various details. Of course, the entry itself, this paragraph, is quite rigidly structured. We start with the J number, which is effectively a digital object identifier, which allows you to find this pastel in all sorts of simple ways, followed by the name of the sitter, the technical details of size and so on, whether it was exhibited during La Tour's life, then the location and provenance, the exhibition history, the literature, and possibly some short notes that are specific to that pastel. But the main entry, of course, is above and discusses Ledeguive himself. One thing I should explain is that the images throughout the dictionary appear immediately after, not before, these entries. So when you see the J number here, it is the image after it that refers. I know that everyone thinks that they're captions and it's the other way around, but I can't stress this too much. There's the opportunity within many of these entries to click on a larger image, which will open up in a different browser. But you don't really need to do that because the PDFs themselves are stored at quite high resolution, and you can actually blow them up and still see quite a lot of detail. So even at 300% enlargement, you've got quite a good image. And remember, you can either hit the plus sign on the ribbon at the top, or you can just do Control F, or Control plus, or Control minus to move within the PDF and enlarge or diminish. Now, I've mentioned the J numbers. Those are quite important because they run throughout the dictionary, not just the La Tour material. It's a double decimal system. Don't be frightened. It's actually extremely easy to use. It has three elements. First of all, J, which simply alerts you to the fact there's something to do with Jefferson's Dictionary of Pastellists. The first group of digits between the two dots tells you who the artist is, and the second group of digits tells you which work it is within that artist's oeuvre. And it's decimal in the sense that 0.46 occurs after 0.459 and before 0.5. So they're organized as decimal fractions, as it were. And it's important that when you type this, you don't put in any spaces or deal with it in any way. But once you've got that J number, here it's J.46.1969, you can use it to find material in various ways. So let's get out of this PDF and go back to the home page of our browser. And if you type in that same number in the search box, just as we did with the date, you can search and get directed to the same document or some of the other documents in which that pastel is discussed. And you can follow these hyperlinks from within the site. It's worth noting that the J number is actually such a specific structure that you can just Google it in most cases and get to the same documents. So if within a search box there's nothing to do with Pastellists, you just put in J461969. I do suggest you put this in quotes so that Google searches for the exact string rather than making its own mind up. Then you'll be taken through Google to that PDF document with the catalogue entry in it. So let's go back to the home page and to the La Tour home page within that. We've discussed the main catalogue entries, but I do want to draw your attention also to the more detailed material in these essays. They cover some of the most important pastels, such as the portrait of Madame de Pompadour in the Louvre, or the magnificent pastel of Duval de l'Épinois in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon, whom I put on the cover of the single hard copy that I showed you at the beginning of this talk. But they also cover some less well-known pastels that just happen to be rather important for various reasons. There's the article on the Abbé Pommier, who is La Tour's great friend, the executor of his will, and an important art collector. And the essay on Pommier goes through a lot of detail that wouldn't be appropriate in the main run of the dictionary entries. Or, for example, Mademoiselle de Pouvigné, who is a dancer. The article on her reproduces the police reports on her affairs with a whole string of gentlemen, many of whom were La Tour's sitters. So this explores the oeuvre of La Tour from a completely different angle. Let's go to Madame de Pompadour. Again, click on the hyperlink. It'll download a PDF, which we then need to open. So now we're within the PDF of Madame de Pompadour, and you can see it's quite a long entry, and it shows you the sort of material that's available within the La Tour catalogue in various guises. It repeats the technical detail that you would expect to find in the main entry, but it gives a much broader discussion than is there possible. This illustrates also some of the original material that I've been able to find, because although Madame de Pompadour is probably the best and most deeply studied La Tour work, I've approached this from an angle which was not known to Xavier Salmon, who wrote the recent catalogue entry for the Louvre exhibition in 2018. This essentially explores the discussion that La Tour had with Madame de Graffigny, one of the famous salonières, as early as 1748. And it's quite important because there is considerable uncertainty about the gestation of this work. And the Madame de Graffigny discussion takes us back much earlier than Salmon does. It also reproduces the préparations, 3 of which are in the Musée Saint-Quentin, and describes how the work evolved. One of the things that I find particularly interesting is La Tour's handling of material. And here I've put together the carpets that you see both in Madame de Pompadour and in the other very famous full-scale pastel in the Getty or the Président Royal. And you can see La Tour's fascination with carpets. And how does that arise? Well, it turns out that La Tour's mother, whom we knew before, only her name, Reine Havard, came from a carpet-making family. One of the things we're constantly told by the contemporary critics is that La Tour was a very accurate portraitist. Resemblance was one of his primary virtues. This is a thesis that needs to be challenged and examined critically. And in this article on Pompadour, I've included a montage of 6 images of her from contemporary artists, including La Tour, from which she emerges as something of an outlier. This is in contrast, I think, to La Tour's representation of his friend the Abbé Pommier, where, and you'll find this illustration in the Pommier essay, which I referred to earlier, you can see how this priest and magistrate evolved over a period of some 60 years from the childhood representation by L'Argilière to La Tour's image of him, probably done in the mid-1750s, but exhibited in the 1763 Salon, to the drawing by Cochin in 1772, and the later bust by Gouin. And you can see a really quite striking resemblance of the kind that portrait specialists enjoy. Also within this Pommier article, I'm going to take you to the 2-page view, which is useful for scrolling. You can see Pommier's art collection here, but I've also discussed the question of copies and different versions. So if we look in more detail at this image, what you can see in the middle is the main La Tour pastel of Pommier, which belonged to Pommier himself. On the left, the studio replica that La Tour made for himself, and which is still in Saint-Quentin. And on the right you see an extremely skillful copy, which is in the museum at Melbourne, and which was bought by Melbourne before the Abbé Pommier's own version came to light. And this illustrates the problem of cataloguing La Tour's work, because some of these copies are really extremely convincing, and it's only when you put them up against the original that you see that what's happened is that the copyist has copied in meticulous detail when he'd have been more convincing if he'd actually changed some of the elements. When La Tour repeats himself, he doesn't slavishly copy, he produces a similar effect. But when a copyist copies, that is what they do. There is, I think, throughout the work on La Tour, a need to go back and question some of the fundamentals that have been accepted throughout. This is just a hint, but perhaps an even more celebrated example is the famous self-portrait in Amiens. For this, I'm going to remind you that I also have a blog on which I explain in some greater detail and informality than is appropriate in a formal catalogue raisonné some of these discoveries. So if I type in the search box for my blog, which you can get to from that tab on my homepage of the dictionary website, let's just type in Amiens, and that will take you to an article which I called Super omnes docentes se intellexit, which is the inscription on the frame on the bottom of this very famous self-portrait in Amiens. And I'm not going to go through all the detailed argument, but suffice it to conclude that this famous icon, which has been repeated endlessly, reproduced always as an autograph work by La Tour, turns out actually to be a copy by one of La Tour's most talented students, an artist called Montjoie, whom most people have never heard of. And the documentation, I'm afraid, is quite difficult to circumvent. It's perhaps a puzzling conclusion and a disturbing one in many ways, but it does explain why we have to go right back to basics and question everything when putting together a catalogue of La Tour. So going back to the La Tour homepage, I want to draw your attention also to one other absolutely crucial part of the work, which is the chronological table of documents relating to La Tour. Again, this is a PDF which opens when you click on the hyperlink. So when you open that PDF, this is what you see. I will just show that to you in two-page view, and you can see that this basically starts before La Tour's birth and goes through until after his death. You can use the bookmarks to find a particular document quickly. This document also includes the entries in the Salon Livre and the criticism from contemporary art critics of works in the Salon. But it includes vastly more material than was originally put together by Georges Wildenstein. If we go back to the beginning, you can see I have carefully preserved what was in the original Wildenstein catalogue by setting it in a different typeface than my editions. The original material is in Times Roman, which is this typeface, and subtly different are the additions I've made which are printed in Garamond. There's probably 3 or 4 times more material in the new document than in 1928. Some of this, quite a lot of it, is frankly trivial, but there are some important additions. Quite a lot of those relate to the École de Dessin and the museum in Saint-Quentin and how it was managed after La Tour's death. But there are also important contemporary additions. Among them, the discussion, for example, of La Tour's house at Auteuil, which I have printed the surveyor's detailed description. There is also details of the property development that La Tour undertook together with his other brother, Charles. The brother we all know about is Jean-François, who bequeathed La Tour's studio contents to Saint-Quentin, but the elder brother, Charles, who was a supplier of the army in Italy, together with Maurice Quentin, invested heavily in a property speculation. Again, this is not widely discussed in the literature. So, at the end of that, let's return to the question that Diderot asked in his Salon de 1767. Obtiendrait-on d'une étude opiniâtre et longue le mérite de La Tour? Or, as it's been translated, even if one were to undertake a dogged, extended study, could one fathom La Tour's merit? Well, I leave that to you to decide. But one thing is certain, we need to gather all the material together to attempt to do so. Thank you.